Let us discuss the most serious and the most stressful game jam, the JuniperDev Game Jam, which I have been so excited about. If you're not familiar with who JuniperDev is, I highly recommend checking her out. Her videos are so fun and help you develop a passion in game development or just appreciate the games that you play a bit more. This was originally supposed to be a vlog type video, but I am like really bad at recording as I go. So I'm just gonna do an entire review of the game jam, everything that I did and how it went. Also, another disclaimer, this is no hate to the JuniperDev Game Jam. This is just stressful because of my own issues. You know, not being able to work on the game because of my classes, making a visual novel, even though it's incredibly confusing to make a visual novel. For the first day, right, when the theme was first announced. So the theme was Spin to Win, and I had two ideas. The first was a game about an electron spin, basically. I just thought, okay, serious things, spinning, electron spin, I don't know, but I kind of realized like, okay, this is not a game that I myself would play, and also just doesn't really have anything special about it or anything in depth about it. The second idea that I had was to revolve the game around those tabletop spinners because I really loved those. Those were like one of my favorite childhood toys, and I thought, okay, if I do this, I can also incorporate a visual novel. I have been wanting to make a visual novel for so long now. Ever since I made my first itch.io account, I downloaded a bunch of visual novels and I've had such an admiration for them. So before anything, I made an intro script for the visual novel, and then I was thinking of what engine I should use. Originally, I thought I was going to use RenPy because it's just so well known and it's kind of the engine for visual novels, so to speak. But I immediately ran into a problem, which was if I want to make a visual novel and I also want to have the player like do things within the game itself, like click on certain objects and have that kind of decide what branch of dialogue you go down, I would have to write functions within the code. And I had no idea how to do that in RenPy. So I googled tutorials for visual novels in Godot because that's just the software, that's just the engine that I'm familiar with. And I saw that there were like 2 or 3 tutorials and I thought, okay, so it's possible. I want to explain that me deciding to make a visual novel was honestly the start of this being the most stressful game jam ever, because I was doing some research and I found a video where they were like, oh, a lot of beginners make visual novels because they think it's easy and that's where they go wrong. And when I watched it, I was like, okay, I'm sure. But then they were actually right and I should have listened to them. Using Godot, I found 2 dialogue plugins that kind of help with the process of making a visual novel. They were Dialogic and Dialogue Manager. I personally went with Dialogue Manager because there were more tutorials for it and I saw that you could call functions within the dialogue script. And I was like, okay, this is exactly what I need. I downloaded Dialogue Manager and I kind of created the opening scene where, you know, the dialogue plays, you get some context, and then the first few items appear. When I finished making the opening scene, I kind of got used to how to code it because it's, okay, so the code is all over the place because it's basically a bunch of function calls here and there. Within the dialogue, it calls certain functions, and those functions usually cause items, which are buttons, to appear, and those buttons will cause a dialogue to appear. I'm sure there might have been, or there has to be, a better way to code this, but that's just what I came up with on the spot. It was time to make the actual spin function, where after you reach a certain point of dialogue, you have to spin a tabletop spinner, and I realized I had no idea how statistics works. Let me just explain what my thought process. It's kind of like heads and tails essentially. The default win rate is 0.5 or 50%, but I want the choices to directly affect the win rate. So every choice will increase or decrease the win rate by some percentage, randomizing a value between the win rate and 1, with anything below 1 indicating that you lost. Now the issue is that floats have a lot of decimals. So if you were to go from 1 to 5, you'd only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. But to go from 0.5 to 1, you'd have way more steps because there's all those decimals in between, which is why every time I ran the spin function, I kept losing. My solution to this was, okay, let me just convert the win rate into an integer by multiplying it with 10, and that sort of worked. It would still have a higher chance of losing than a higher chance of winning. To fix this, I made it so that every time you lose, it would auto respin for you and your win rate would go up by 2%, which kind of fixed the issue. It wasn't as tedious to constantly like respin. The only issue now was that for some godforsaken reason, the lose dialogue would play even after the win dialogue. I honestly had such a hard time dealing with this because the entire point of a visual novel is that the visuals and the novel work together. The dialogue plays when the dialogue is supposed to play. So it was very frustrating to deal with that. And I want to clarify. I had classes and quizzes in between this game jam, so I spent the first few days choosing the engine, the idea, making the script, making the items appear. I think right at the end, I decided, okay, let's make the spin function. I want to talk about an alternative plan that I had where if you lost, you would connect to a game like Pac-Man, and then you would have to clear that game to win. Pac-Man tutorials were actually very difficult to follow, so I was like, okay, let me make Flappy Bird. Flappy Bird tutorial also takes way too long. Then I was like, okay, let's just make a snake game. I followed the entire tutorial. This is like the last day of the game jam, by the way, and I'm doing all this. And that did not work, you guys. Why did it not work? Because I cannot for the life of me connect two different scripts to one singular scene. I don't know why. And the snake game itself just looked so ugly and it did not fit the vibe of my game. I wanted my game to have kind of an ASCII feel to it, and the snake game was just did not look like that, and it had a bunch of bugs, and I was too far into the game jam to work on a completely different game, which is why we landed on the entire 0 or 1 statistic anyways for the spin function. This is when there's like 30 minutes to an hour, I'm not sure which one it was, until the game jam ends, and I have literally just buttons and the dialogue ready. There's no art. I have to speed run some pixel art for the items. However, I had done a new computer setup, okay? And when I did that, I did not install any of the export presets for Godot. So when I went to convert it to a website, it didn't have that template. Because for Godot to export things into different applications, like a web game or a desktop game or a Linux game, you have to have that template downloaded. No, I didn't have any templates whatsoever. So I was like, okay, let me just export the entire file so that people can then download it and play it themselves. I accidentally exported directly into where my repository was for the game. So all of my files were overwritten by the export. I upload the game regardless, and somehow you can't play it whatsoever. And then I'm like, okay, this was horrible. I don't know what the heck was going on. Let me just leave it as it is and try to fix it tomorrow. Unfortunately, although there was a 24-hour period where you could adjust like bugs and stuff, I just could not figure out what was going on. A really kind soul comments, hey, I had to use a decompiler to play the game. Can you please try and upload the fixed version? And then I downloaded the decompiler that they recommended, and I was able to fix the game, but I wasn't able to upload it because there was not enough time. And I was just so burnt out at this point. I was like, oh my god, this is the worst game I've ever made. And it really was, because it was just so incomplete. I had the opening script made, okay, sure. And then I had the first few items made, okay, sure. But the spin function was still so meh, and then there was no conclusion or depth to the game, and there was also like barely any art for the game as well. But people were still so kind. They commented, they were like, oh, I love the visuals, which did make me very happy, and I was able to remake the entire game within the next week or 2 weeks, which is what I'm going to talk about right now. So to remake the game, I decided to completely abandon the dialogue manager plugin that I was using because I feel like I just needed more control over what was happening, because just the random calling functions was so disorienting and disorganized. I kind of understood how a dialogue manager works afterwards, so I'm gonna break it down. Essentially, all dialogue managers start with a JSON script. This is kind of where you make your branches, your options, your identifiers. So the JSON script is actually very easy to make, but what you then need to do is parse that JSON script so that GDScript itself can read that file. Then it was just about reading through the line and seeing okay, what type of dialogue is this? Is it dialogue? Is it an item description? Or is it a narration? And then it would call its respective function. And afterwards, I was able to make a story state function where I would essentially check if certain scripts were called, and this way I was able to check which part of the story we're at and which branch we're going towards, essentially. For the spin function this time around, I got rid of the random integer business. Instead, I just used the random float function that Godot itself has built in, and then comparing that to the win rate. And if it's greater than the win rate, then great, you've won. If it's not, then you've lost. After the dialogue was done, originally I made some art in IBS Paint. Since so many people liked the visuals of the original game, I thought, why get rid of it? And I just made some art in a sprite really quickly and put that in. And I really like the game. Like, it's not my favorite game, but I think I've definitely learned a lot in terms of code, in terms of visual novels and dialogue, and it was just a very fun, albeit stressful experience. Anyways, I downloaded the template for the web version of the game, and I was able to export it and upload it. Yeah, you can play the game on my itch.io happilyrai. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. I didn't have a script for this, and I also am sick, so that's why the video is kind of all over the place. I'm not sure if it was very interesting to watch either, but it's been a long time since I've made a video, and I just feel like I want to make more videos, even if they're kind of bad or mid or unorganized, because it's just nice to share my projects with you guys. I've since participated in another game jam, so I'll make a video about that as well.